What's your number? 1 million? 2 million? 3 million? 750,000? I've asked that question in client meetings for over 22 years, and almost everyone has an answer. Some got it from a calculator, some got it from a magazine ad, some got it from their brother in law at Thanksgiving. And actually, some people get it from their barber. Here's what almost nobody has: an answer to the question that actually matters. Not what's your number, but what's your income? Those are not the same question, and confusing them is costing retirees hundreds of thousands of dollars. Here's a fast self-check. Could you tell me right now, without looking anything up, how much of your monthly retirement spending will be covered by income that cannot be reduced by a market downturn? Not a percentage, a dollar amount. If that number isn't immediate and exact, this episode is for you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You're listening to The Income Standard, where retirement income is designed, not guessed. I am Tod Long, and this is the show for people who are done accumulating and ready to start engineering. Let's get into it. Welcome in, folks. The retirement number is one of the most successful marketing concepts in the history of financial services. If you remember this, back in the 2000s, early 2000s, ING ran a campaign with a literal orange number floating above people's heads, their retirement target. The idea was brilliant: reduce the complexity of retirement planning to a single achievable figure. Hit the number, retire, done. The problem is that number is static. And out of my 22 years, I've never seen a static retirement. Retirement is dynamic. It's 30 years of spending, inflation, healthcare cost, market volatility, tax changes, and unexpected life events. A single number at the start of that journey tells you almost nothing about whether you'll be okay at the end of it. And yet that number is what most people are optimizing for. That's what the industry sold them. That's what their 401k dashboard shows them. That's what their advisor uses to benchmark success. Let me give you a simple example of why this is dangerous. Two people retire the same week. Both have $1.2 million. By every traditional "did you hit your number" metric, they're in identical positions. Person A has no guaranteed income sources except Social Security. Their entire lifestyle is funded by portfolio withdrawals. Person B has Social Security optimized, a pension of $18,000 a year, and an annuity generating another $22,000 annually. Their non-negotiable expenses are completely covered by guaranteed income. Same number, completely different financial realities, completely different levels of security, completely different vulnerabilities to market downturns, healthcare shocks, and longevity. The number doesn't tell you any of that, which is exactly why it's the wrong question. Here's the reframe I want you to take away from this episode. Stop asking, do I have enough? Start asking, have I engineered enough guaranteed income to cover my non-negotiable expenses forever? That's a fundamentally different question, and it leads to fundamentally different planning. When you ask, do I have enough? You're thinking in balance sheet terms. Asset minus liability. Am I above the line or below it? When you ask, have I engineered enough guaranteed income? You're thinking in cash flow terms. How much comes in every month, regardless of what happens in the market, regardless of how long I live, regardless of what my portfolio does in year 2 of retirement. One question is about a snapshot. The other is about a stream. And in retirement, streams are what keep you alive. Here's the concept that changes this conversation: income flooring. Income flooring means identifying your non-negotiable monthly expenses, your mortgage, rent, utilities, healthcare premiums, your basic food and transportation, and then building a layer of guaranteed income that covers those expenses completely, regardless of what happens in markets, regardless of how long you live. Once that floor is in place, your investment portfolio changes its entire job description. It's no longer your life support system, it's your discretionary fund, your travel money, your gift giving, your flexibility, your legacy. That's a completely different psychological relationship with your money. And it's only possible when you've stopped asking about your number and started engineering your income. I want to stay with this for a minute because there's a version of the income flooring problem that's actually more dangerous than having no floor at all. It's having a floor that feels solid but isn't. I call it the false door. You've probably seen the ride at the amusement park, the one where you're standing on a platform that looks completely solid, and then without warning, the floor drops out from under you. That's the experience I'm describing. Not a collapse you saw coming, a surface that felt like solid ground until it wasn't. And it shows up in almost every planning conversation I have with people who've been told they're in good shape. Here's what the false floor looks like. You have Social Security, maybe a small pension. Between those two sources, you're covering, let's say, 70% of your non-negotiable monthly expenses. The other 30% comes from portfolio withdrawals. On paper, that looks like a pretty healthy income picture. Most advisors would look at that situation and say, yeah, you're okay, you're fine. In a stable market, you are fine. But here's what that 30% gap actually means. It means your floor has a load-bearing wall made of assumptions. The assumption that your portfolio will cooperate. The assumption that the market won't drop 25% in the first year of retirement. The assumption that you won't need to sell assets at a loss to cover the gap between what's guaranteed and what you need. A floor with a gap in it isn't a floor. It's a platform suspended over uncertainty. And the gap doesn't have to be large to be dangerous. Small gaps are often the most insidious because they're easy to rationalize. It's only $400 a month. I'll just pull it out of the portfolio, which is true, until it isn't. Here's the sequence that breaks that rationale. Market drops 30% in year one. Your portfolio goes from $780,000 to just under $550,000. Now that monthly gap isn't being pulled from a healthy portfolio, it's being pulled from a damaged one. And every withdrawal you make from a down portfolio locks in losses. The portfolio has to go back not just to its original value, but past it to compensate for the shares you sold at the bottom. That's not a catastrophe by itself, but it's a compound drag on your retirement income that never fully resolves. And it all started with a floor that was 70% there. The standard isn't 70%. It's 100%. Because a floor with a 30% gap isn't a floor. It's a very high ceiling. If you've been thinking about your own number while I've been talking, if you're somewhere around 70 to 80% covered, but not all the way there, that gap is real. It has a dollar amount and it has a solution, but only if you find it first. A retirement plan built to the income standard starts with income, not assets. It defines the guaranteed floor first, then builds the discretionary layer on top of it. In practice, that means before we ever start talking about portfolio allocation or withdrawal rates, we answer three questions. One, what are your non-negotiable monthly expenses in retirement? Not what you want to spend, what you have to spend every month to maintain your life. Two, what guaranteed income sources do you currently have or can build to cover these expenses completely. 3, what's the gap between those two numbers and what's the most efficient, cost-effective, tax-conscious way to close it? Everything else in the plan flows from these 3 answers. The portfolio, the tax sequencing, the RMD strategy, all of it is downstream from the income floor. That's the income standard framework. Income first, architecture before allocation. We're about halfway through, and I want to stop here for a reason. We've been talking about income flooring, the concept of building guaranteed income that covers your non-negotiable expenses completely, so your portfolio is never your life support system. The concept is only abstract until you run your own numbers. So before we go any further, go to the incomestandard.com and find the income gap calculator on the resources page. It starts by asking, where are you in your retirement journey? Still working and planning ahead? Recently retired? Or already retired and looking to restructure? Because the income gap looks different depending on which side of retirement you're actually standing on. From there, it asks you about your guaranteed income sources and your non-negotiable monthly expenses. 4 minutes. The result is a specific dollar gap or confirmation that your floor is closed. Most people who run it discover they have a gap they didn't know existed. Some discover their floor is closer to close than they thought. Either way, you leave with a number instead of an assumption. If you're in the car, come back to it. If you have 4 minutes right now, use them. Theincomestandard.com, resources page, income gap calculator. I'll be here when you get back. Let me walk you through how this actually looks in a real planning conversation. Of course, names have been changed to protect their privacy. So we have David and Carol came to me roughly 8 months before David's planned retirement date. David is 63 years old. Carol is 61. They have $780,000 in combined retirement accounts, a paid-off home, and no debt. By traditional metrics, they looked very solid. Their advisor had run a Monte Carlo projection showing an 89% success probability, and that number felt reassuring to them. But when we sat down and mapped their income architecture, really mapped it out, here's what we found. David's Social Security at 65, $22,000 a year. He'd been planning to take it early rather than wait. Carol's Social Security at 62 is $11,000 a year. She planned to file as soon as she could when she was eligible. Combined guaranteed income, $33,000 a year. That's $2,750 per month. Their non-negotiable monthly expenses, healthcare premiums, utilities, food, car, property taxes, insurance, $4,800 a month, which is roughly about $58,000 a year. To be exact, $57,600 a year. Guaranteed income, $33,000. Non-negotiable expenses, $57,600. That's a $24,600 annual gap, or $2,050 every single month, not covered by guaranteed income. That means 43% of their non-negotiable expenses depended entirely on their portfolio cooperating every month for the rest of their lives. At $780,000, covering that $2,050 monthly gap requires pulling 3.15% annually from the portfolio before a single dollar of discretionary spending. That's the travel, that's the gifts, the home maintenance, emergencies, legacy. None of that is included in that number. Their 89% Monte Carlo probability wasn't wrong, but it didn't show them this. It didn't show them that their income floor had a $2,050 hole in it that the market would be filling for life. Now, could Carol delay Social Security? Yes. If she waits until 67, her benefit increases to about $16,500 a year. That adds roughly about $5,500 to their guaranteed income and closes the gap about $19,000 annually. Still, $1,500 a month of floor exposure. Social Security optimization helped. It did not close the gap, though. What closed it was a fixed annuity funded by repositioning $210,000 of their existing $780,000 into guaranteed lifetime income. That $210,000 generates approximately $1,800 a month, enough to close the $2,050 gap when combined with Carol's delayed Social Security with a small buffer above it. The result? David and Carol's $570,000 remaining portfolio is no longer their life support system. It's their discretionary wealth, the layer that funds travel, gifts, legacy, and whatever life brings them down the road that they didn't plan for. Same $780,000, different architecture. Their floor is closed. Their portfolio is protected. Their income holds regardless of what the market does the day David retires. That's not a better investment strategy. That's a better structure. If David and Carol's situation sounds familiar, solid balance, reasonable projections, but nobody has ever mapped the specific dollar gap between your guaranteed income and your non-negotiable monthly expenses, that gap is real. It has a number, and it is closable, but only if you find it first. David and Carol's gap was about $2,000 a month, actually $2,050. So let me show you what that gap costs if it doesn't get closed. Not dramatically, not catastrophically, quietly, the way most retirement income problems actually unfold. Year one of retirement, markets are flat. The $2,050 monthly gap gets pulled from the portfolio without a second thought. 12 months, $24,600, manageable on $780,000. Barely even noticeable. Year three, markets have had a difficult stretch, down 14% over 18 months. The portfolio is at around $620,000 now. The $2,050 gap is still $2,050, but now it's being pulled from a significantly smaller pool of money. Inflation has pushed their non-negotiable expenses to near $5,000 a month. The gap is widening, not closing. Year seven, Carol has a health event. Nothing catastrophic, a procedure, a recovery period, physical therapy, out-of-pocket costs over 6 months, roughly about $38,000. They pull it from the portfolio. It's now the first call for every unexpected expense because the income floor never fully held. None of these events is a disaster on its own, but collectively they represent a pattern where the portfolio is always the backstop, always under pressure, always being asked to do a job a guaranteed income floor was supposed to do. By year 15, the portfolio that looks solid at retirement has been quietly depleted by a combination of floor withdrawals, sequence drag, inflation creep, and unexpected expenses. Not gone, but meaningfully smaller than any projection showed at retirement. $210,000 repositioned into guaranteed lifetime income in year one. Carol delays Social Security to 67. Floors closed. Portfolio untouched by non-negotiable expenses for the rest of their lives. The entire chain of events above simply doesn't happen. That's what I mean when I say the gap is closable, but only if you find it first. The finding is the work. The closing, when you do it before retirement, is almost always straightforward. If you ran numbers in your head during this sequence, thinking about your own floor, your own gap, your own portfolio doing double duty, that's the signal. That's when the review stops being interesting and becomes necessary. The question, do I have enough, might be the most expensive question in retirement planning, not because it's wrong to ask, but because it's incomplete. The right question is, have I built a floor that holds no matter what? If you've never had a conversation that started with your non-negotiable expenses and worked backwards to guaranteed income sources, that's the conversation the Income Standard Review is designed to have with you. We start with the floor, we map your guaranteed sources, we identify the gap, and we show you exactly where your income architecture stands, measured against the income standard. This review is for people ready to move from my projection looks fine to my floor is built and guaranteed. If that's where you are, the conversation is waiting. Schedule your review at theincomestandard.com. No cost, no obligation, just clarity. That is the income standard for this week, folks. If this episode gave you a framework you didn't have before, share it with someone who actually needs it. Forward it to a friend who's 5 years from retirement and still thinking in terms of balance sheets instead of income architecture. And if you found yourself thinking about your own income floor while listening, like what's guaranteed, what's not, and what that gap might be, that's the signal. That's when this review makes sense. The review is waiting for you at theincomestandard.com. Again, that is theincomestandard.com. There's no cost, there's no pitch, just measurement. I'm Tod Long. We'll talk to you next week.